today, as are many of the other stories. Let's take a look at some of them. So we start in Germany, where the Frankfurter Allgemeine is headlining the showdown with Merkel as Interior Minister Horst Seehofer offers to resign, as we've just mentioned, over her migration policy. We'll look at that in just a second. Front page of the Financial Times is looking at the European Union hinting at countermeasures to President Trump's threat of car tariffs in a submission to the US Department of Commerce, which the FT says it's seen as much as $294 billion worth of trade has been earmarked. The Daily Telegraph looks at the World Cup news. Of course, it's calling it a Russian revelation after the hosts sent home Spain in a penalty shootout. The Independent takes a look at a story in Australia where there is a ban now on plastic single-use bags, and it's led to widespread abuse, apparently, at the tills. It's been labelled bag rage as two major supermarkets struggle to impose the ban. One irate customer tried to strangle a shop assistant. And then finally, The Guardian looks at Wimbledon, as are many others. They're leading, of course, with Andy Murray's decision to not be a part of Wimbledon this year due to his recent surgery. But we've still got Roger Federer to watch, of course. He plays on centre court today. So let's get stuck in. It's lovely to have Stephanie Hare with us once again, a political analyst. So nice to see you, Stephanie, on a Monday morning so early. So let's talk about the showdown with Merkel. We've got the German paper Frankfurter Allgemeine here looking at the fact that Seehofer is threatening to resign. How big an upset could that be?
I mean, it's big enough that it could bring down her coalition government and trigger snap elections. And we don't want to assume that that's necessarily the way that things will go, but if he pulls out, he's the leader of her sister party, which is in Bavaria, the CSU. If he pulls out and resigns, they either have to replace him as interior minister and somehow the coalition sort of lumbers on, and that might be a victory for her or a loss. We're not really sure yet.
In terms of what he's thinking, there's local elections in Bavaria coming up, and it's really important that his party does extremely well in those local elections. He did threaten Angela Merkel and say, come home with a good deal. And clearly he's not happy with the deal that was brokered. And I mean, it was brokered in the early hours of the morning, wasn't it, after a very difficult summit in Brussels?
That's right. He's not happy with the deal. And the deal is basically about secondary migration within the European Union by asylum seekers. So imagining that asylum seekers arrive in a European Union country, are granted asylum, but then move to a second EU country, in this case, Germany, because they would prefer to live there. Perhaps they feel they'll have a better quality of life. He wants to stop that. And what we have found is that several EU member states, so we're talking Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, have come back and said to Angela Merkel, we didn't agree to any such deal to, take people and keep them there, that we had agreed that we would. We are happy to allow this secondary migration. And Horst Seehofer is saying, absolutely not. We want to expand German police powers to turn people away and send them back to the first EU country where they were granted asylum. So this is really a migration story, and it's not an economic story. Bavaria is one of the richest federal states in Germany. They have really low unemployment, things are doing really well. This is about controlling borders and this sort of theme that we're really seeing around the world of migration and how do we cope with it.
So we've got to keep a very close eye, obviously, on how this plays out. The euro, the currency, is weaker today. No big surprise, because as you say, this could have a serious impact on Chancellor Merkel's leadership. Yep. This is probably the biggest challenge she's seen for many years in terms of her position.
I mean, this is her fourth term as Chancellor. She's been in power for 13 years. She's a force to be reckoned with. It's entirely possible that she will win this power struggle, and he may leave and somehow the coalition cobbles on. That said, if this goes bad, and if the coalition breaks down, or if she's just seen as an enfeebled leader, what we could have is what is supposed to be Europe's powerhouse member state, weak and uncertain, and that's not great for Europe.
Absolutely not, hence the weakness we're seeing in the currency today. Let's now move on to the Financial Times and looking at the European Union as a whole, its battle with the United States. The FT is saying that they've seen a written submission from the European Commission to the US Department of Commerce, which is looking at a detailed response to Mr. Trump's tariff threats, as it were.
Yeah. We really shouldn't be surprised by this because we just saw yesterday on Canada Day, July 1st, that Canada responded to US tariffs in kind. So it's absolutely like for like. And anyone who's been following US-EU trade negotiations, which normally are done in quite cordial, although competitive ways, is not going to be surprised. The EU is not going to tolerate anything that Donald Trump is doing and just sort of let it happen. It will be met with a very strong response. These are some of the most experienced trade negotiators in the world on both sides of the Atlantic. So it's not surprising. There's a lot of noise coming from the United States and from the president on this. The EU will hit back just as hard. But they will do it in a measured way, I think, as well.
And again, we're just having to cover every single twist and turn on this and see how it all plays out, because a lot of this, I mean, you know, President Trump was speaking on Fox News on Sunday in a special interview, and he had a lot of very fantastic headlines that the media are putting out everywhere. But in terms of the reality of this, we've got to wait and see, haven't we, in terms of how it's going to impact. Well,
exactly. And the idea that, you know, you sort of drive up prices on automobiles, which can end up hurting U.S. jobs. A lot of these European cars are manufactured in the United States and plants in the U.S. So this could end up backfiring.
Now, let's talk about the World Cup. You told me last time I saw you that you've been glued. I mean, you just can't get away from the screen at the moment. It's so unpredictable, isn't it?
I mean, I've been sad ever since Peru was knocked out. I would just like to note that.
That's the team you were supporting. But hey, there's still so much to still so much to play for.
Exactly. So we saw Croatia beat Denmark, Russia beat Spain, which I think was the big upset yesterday. We've got Brazil and Mexico today. We've got Belgium and Japan. So it's the big question of whether or not these, you know, sort of incumbents are going to be knocked out, and we'll see underdogs or unexpected teams getting through. And that's what I think makes football so gripping.
It is unbelievably gripping, and some of the results so far have been so shocking. I mean, we just didn't predict what might happen next. It's
We're in a country that might bring football home.
Who knows?
I don't want to jinx it, but it's exciting for England too.
All right. Well, absolutely. Well, let's talk about Australia now. I mean, in this country, we've seen a lot of change when it comes to the use of plastic. We've got a lot of laws coming through. We still can have a plastic bag in a supermarket. We have to pay for it. In Australia, there's a complete ban, and there's a real reaction to this, which I'm surprised to hear about, actually.
Yeah, it sounds as though they haven't.
Its ferocity, you know.
It's the whole, like, making the case for change. So we've seen, you know, with David Attenborough's beautiful show that he just did recently, the damage we know that's happening to sea life because of plastics in the oceans and all the different creatures, birds and fish that are eating them and dying as a result. We have to cut down our use of plastic, and particularly plastic bags, the big one. It seems strange because Australia in some ways is so connected to the sea that they haven't made that cultural change perhaps as effectively as they could. I'm sure they've tried, but clearly something has happened if you have customers strangling shop assistants.
Absolutely. I was quite surprised. But now let's do a final word on Andy Murray. Everybody's talking about it, the fact that he's withdrawing from Wimbledon, and he says it's really with a heavy heart. Of course, for any British player to be at Wimbledon is such a big part of their calendar, their tennis calendar. But he's looking ahead, and he's looking to the hard court tournaments, August in New York.
Well, he had that operation in January to reshape his hip. He's had a long-standing hip injury, and I think he's really playing the long game here as an athlete. He said, if this were my last Wimbledon, I would consider playing, but he's hoping to have a few more Wimbledons in him and potentially to win them. So it's kind of sacrificing something, I'm sure, in the short term with the hopes of preserving the longevity of his career.
But in the meantime, we've got Roger Federer playing today. Of course, he's hoping to get his 9th title at Wimbledon. We've got Serena Williams as well back in Wimbledon, having become a mum. There's, you know, so many big stars back in Wimbledon.
Yeah, for anybody who loves athletics and particularly tennis, this is one of the big tournaments to watch, and again, lots of drama, I'm sure.
Lots of drama, and let's hope it's not too hot for them, which they're not used to at Wimbledon, I would imagine. Something they have to face in Spain. Thank you so much for being with us, Stephanie, this morning, and thank you too for your company.